Chris Mackowski for the American Battlefield Trust, and I'm on the Payne's Farm battlefield at Mine Run, and we're commemorating the 160th anniversary of the Great Battle Never Fought, the campaign that falls in the forgotten fall of 1863. In our previous video, we talked about how the armies converge in an area known as Locust Grove as George Gordon Meade tries to get around Robert E. Lee's flank and get in his rear, flushing him out of his position. But Lee is able to see what's going on, he responds, and the two armies begin to clash. The idea is that they're going to consolidate around Locust Grove. That's George Gordon Meade's concentration point there. He thought he'd be able to springboard into Lee's rear, but Lee comes up to meet him. So as the armies begin to converge, we're going to see some action that takes place in this area that we're going to talk about. We're on a trail that is maintained by the American Battlefield Trust on property that is preserved by them. We're kind of out at one of the little far corners here, and so from this spot we're going to take a walk out toward the intersection of Jacobs Ford Road and Raccoon Ford Road, because two parts of both armies are going to converge on that point as they're trying to get where they need to be. Sarah K. Byerly behind the camera, thanks for the great work she's doing. And as we come out here to see what we can see, why look, it's my good friend Dan Davis. That's what we can see.
Hey, good to see you. Hey, imagine that, an American Battlefield Trust employee out on an American Battlefield Trust owned piece of property. It's a beautiful day here at Payne's Farm on the Mine Run battlefield, much different than it was 160 years ago from a weather perspective. By this point in time in November, the weather's starting to turn cold, but as you can see, we have a banner day. It's a great day to be out on the battlefield. And this is a battlefield that you, the members of the American Battlefield Trust, have helped to preserve. This battlefield has not changed very much in the last 160 years. Part of it was wooded. There's a number of ravines that are cut through the course of the battlefield. But as you're going to see in a little bit, there's also some open areas on this field. Now, this was once thought to be a lost battlefield. Not lost that it had been developed, but there was just not a general agreement amongst the historical community as to where this fighting actually took place until one of our friends, Ted Savis, who I'm sure many of you know, a publisher in California, was able to locate this battlefield and work with the trust, and we were able to preserve roughly around 680 acres, the entirety of the Payne's Farm battlefield here in 2002. And as time progressed, we were able to install not only interpretive signs with the help of our friends at Civil War Trails, but trails here as well. So this is a place that you can come out, you can visit. It is, as you can see, rather secluded, but it's a great battlefield to visit pretty much at any time of the year. Again, bring your kids out, bring your pets. This is a place that's great for walking your dogs, but come out here and see Payne's Farm, a relatively forgotten part of Virginia in a relatively forgotten campaign that takes place here in the fall of 1864. I'm going to turn it back over to Chris.
So Dan, as we come out here to the intersection, we'll step out just to get out of the leaves a little bit here. The roads that are behind us, they weren't paved in 1863, but this is how the armies start to concentrate as both portions of both armies are looking toward the Robinson's Tavern intersection. Where are we at and what are we looking at?
So we're at a very critical intersection. Behind me is the Zoar Road. This is the Raccoon Ford Road leading up to Raccoon Ford on the Rapidan River in 1863. Behind us is the Jacobs Ford Road leading up to Jacobs Ford, one of a number of many fords along the Rapidan. And the reason why this is a critical intersection is because if Sarah could turn and pan around and look behind us, back down that road is Robinson's Tavern. That is the main concentration point for the Army of the Potomac. You can see the truck coming up toward us right now. Back up along this road is moving Edward Johnson's division of Jubal Early's 2nd Corps from the Army of Northern Virginia. Early's concentrating 2 divisions at Robinson's Tavern to face Gouverneur K. Warren's 2nd Corps from the Army of the Potomac. Johnson is coming from his position up on the Rapidan. This is the main road, the easiest, shortest route to get to Robinson's Tavern and join up with the rest of the 2nd Corps. But panning out over here and behind Chris's shoulder is the Jacobs Ford Road. Coming down the Jacobs Ford Road is the 3rd Corps under our old friend Blinky French. And Chris, why do we call him Blinky?
The more he drinks, the more he blinks. And even by midday on the 27th of November, he is well pickled. In fact, some of his soldiers say that they wish that they could pop that barrel and see how much liquor they could get out of him. And so he's blinking up a storm on the 27th as things begin to unfold.
So folks, in short, he never met a whiskey bottle he didn't like. French's Third Corps is coming down the Jacobs Ford Road, followed by Uncle John Sedgwick and the Sixth Corps behind the Third. And Payne's Farm, as the battle develops, is going to be a meeting engagement as the Third Corps comes down. Henry Prince's division is coming down the Jacobs Ford Road, strung out here along the Raccoon Ford Road, and almost nearly to Robinson's Tavern is Edward Johnson's division. Up here in this area is George Maryland Stewart's brigade, and men from North Carolina and Virginia. Farther on down the line is the Stonewall Brigade under James Walker, Louisiana Tigers under Leroy Stafford, and finally John M. Jones's Virginians, who are leading Johnson's column. Chris?
Now, it's important. There are 4,400 Confederates through here. They are going to be coming in right on Governor K. Warren's right flank. So there is a bit of jeopardy that could unfold here. But because French is coming down this road, he's actually going to distract Johnson. French gets as far as an intersection that's just a couple miles up the road here by the home of Widow Morris. And he is explicitly told, when you get to that intersection, take the left-hand road. So when he gets there, he's like, what road should I take? And he'll spend a couple hours scouting out both paths. Meade told him, don't go straight, because if you do, you could potentially run into conflict with Confederates who are coming up from that way. So Meade anticipates that there could be trouble, and he wants French to take that left, and French doesn't. Instead, he's going to send out skirmishers. Massachusetts will push through the woods in this direction, and they're going to bump into pickets who are guarding this column as it moves. And both sides think that they're encountering dismounted cavalry, so they misread the situation. And so that's going to then start to really kind of escalate off in the woods here. But Dan, let me bring you on here. So if we're talking about 4,400 Confederates, we've got 2 Federal Corps, 32,000 men bottled up this road. Those numbers don't seem like they add up very well, and yet we're going to see some surprising action here.
We certainly are. And I think one of the critical elements of this fight is that as the Third Corps is coming down Jacobs Ford Road, they're hitting the Johnson's column where the Johnson's wagons and artillery are strung out along the road here. So this is very critical. Johnson has to defend this part of, or this portion of his line. He can't let those wagons and artillery fall into the hands of the Federals. Now, as you mentioned, the Massachusetts men first, 11th Massachusetts, eventually I think the 120th New York, are going to be again pushing down into this area. They're going to engage Stewart's men here. Stewart is going to pull back. He's up here along the road, but he's going to pull back into the woods onto the other side of the road and sort of regroup. But at the same time, he sends a rider back down the road toward Robinson's Tavern to apprise Johnson of this evolving battle on his front late in the afternoon. This is one of the more interesting parts about this engagement. It's fought late in the day. Remember, we're on daylight savings time. They aren't. But at the same time, it's still going to be dark out here at 5 o'clock. And you're going to be moving and maneuvering through these dense woods and open field that we'll visit in just a few minutes. But it's going to be a very short engagement, but a very fierce engagement. We know that from the accounts of the men who fought here on both sides, who talk about this being just a very close-in, very savage fight.
What really amazes me is that Johnson's men here, these are the guys who fight at Culp's Hill at Gettysburg. And they talk about this being as fierce a fight as they have ever been in. Now, if you compare that to the fact that the fight that they were in Culp's Hill was pretty darn fierce, that tells you just how ferocious this is going to get. One North Carolinian says it was like they began to throw mini balls by the bucketful at us when the engagement began. Now, Johnson gets word that there are Federals poking his side, and he immediately turns around and comes back here, and he's going to launch his 4,400 men against this Federal force. He doesn't know what the size is. We know that the Federals outnumber the Confederates here 6-1. In terms of forces engaged, it's 3-1. So we'll leave it up to you to decide whether Johnson is brave or foolhardy in bringing this engagement on, but it's going to have huge implications as this campaign unfolds.
Absolutely, and as Johnson, just as aggressive as Johnson is, the Federals are somewhat a little bit intimidated by what they find out here. They're not expecting to find the Confederates. Prince is not at the top of the list of officers that you would want leading your column if you're Blinky French. And that's going to play out here through the course of the latter part of the afternoon. And when Johnson arrives here, he wants to attempt what is known as a double envelopment. He wants to send Walker's Stonewall Brigade forward to hit what he believes to be the Federal center, while Stewart is going to swing around and strike the Federal right, and then he's going to bring up Stafford and Jones to swing around and strike the Federal left, and pretty much try to encircle this column. Maybe a little bit over aggressive because he doesn't exactly know what he's facing out here.
Now, Dan happens to be conveniently wearing blue. I'm wearing gray, so I'm going to be Johnson's division, and you're going to be the Federals that are up there on the road. And basically, we're going to just try to do this, that double envelopment. When Stewart's guys push forward, they're going to basically try to swing like a door in this direction. That's one brigade versus the other three. So as the other three kind of pinwheel around, it's going to take them longer to get into position than it will for Stewart. And we'll talk a little bit more about that specifically when we get out to our next stop. But here, as Stewart swings into the position, his far rear regiment, the 37th Virginia, finds itself isolated because there are sections of the Excelsior Brigade, the 70th and 71st New York, that swing down across this road and get into Stewart's rear. So those Virginians aren't able to swing forward because they're busy protecting the flank. Titus Williams, no one would have expected him to be a great, brilliant military commander. He graduates 24th out of the class of 27 at VMI, and yet he has done well at First Manassas. He's really distinguished himself at Cedar Mountain, and here he finds himself in this position of jeopardy. If you're Titus Williams, one regiment isolated, essentially as this door swings, he's going to find himself 200 yards away from the rest of his support. If you're him, what do you do in a situation like that?
Well, Titus Williams, the first thing he does is he keeps his head. He keeps cool, which is very important because he's the far Confederate left flank. If his regiment gives way, then the rest of the line back here along the road, and at that point in time, they're moving up toward to attack the Federals, that entire Confederate line could ostensibly give way as well. So what does Titus Williams do? He decides to extend his front as much as possible. Rather than fighting in the traditional linear style, the two lines of men, he decides to push all of his men up into one single line and extend it out as far as he could to deceive the Federals and make them think that they're facing a larger force than what he actually has.
It's one of my most favorite examples of battlefield theatrics because he basically presents himself as a skirmish line, which makes the Excelsior men think like, ooh, there's someone behind them, because your skirmish line pushes out in front of your main force. So that spooks the New Yorkers, who then fall back, and that gives Williams the time to consolidate and get back here and get connected with the rest of Stewart's men. Off to the rear, you can't see it behind that blue house, but there's a big ravine that also is going to play a role in this battle because the New Yorkers are able to kind of get up and through that ravine, and that's what allows them to get behind, but then they fall back into that ravine for protection and can't see some of the action that's going on here. As Stewart's men push forward, they're going to meet some stout resistance from the lead regiments from Prince's division, but they will eventually begin to crumble because over here we're going to see the Stonewall Brigade begin its sweeping forward, sweeping pinwheel forward, and that's going to dislodge the left flank of Prince's men, and they're going to fall back. They're going to get some unexpected support from some artillery that's going to change the tide of battle along here.
Yeah, and one of the other interesting things I find about this battle is it reminds me a lot of the August 1780 Battle of Camden in South Carolina. And when I say that, what I mean by that is, depending on where you are standing at any given point in time on the battlefield, at least in the instance of Camden, the British have the upper hand or the Continentals have the upper hand. It's the same thing here. The Confederates here in this sector are going to have the initial upper hand by driving Blaisdell's men back up the Jacobs Ford Road and threatening those artillery pieces. But as we explore this battlefield a little bit more, we get out into the open ground, we're going to find that in a different sector of this battlefield, the Federals are going to have the upper hand.
When those artillery pieces do finally deploy, it's going to give the 11th New Jersey, which was at the center of the line, a place to then reform. Their color bearer is going to take his flag out, plant it in the middle of the road with those artillery pieces around him. The artillery say that they had so much cannon to bring to bear that they cleared out 4 or 5 acres of woods and as many Confederates. Confederates are actually going to put an artillery battery here in the middle of the road and try to fight back and forth along the open stretch of the road, but we got a lot of woods on either side, so it's not necessarily very good artillery terrain to begin with. But as Dan says, on the other side of the battlefield, things are going to take place that are going to change what happens over here.
And let's head to that section of the battlefield.
Very good, let's go.